Hey everybody, and welcome to today's video with myself, Sarah Lean. In today's video, I'm going to talk about Git, understanding what it is, and also walking you through a bunch of commands that can help you get started. So if you're a beginner to Git, let's dive in and learn some Git commands. So what is Git? Well, Git was invented in 2006 by Linus Torvalds. It's an open source tool that is designed for code management, and it can track changes made to that code. Now you can store your code, whether that is software code or infrastructure as code in a remote repository such as GitHub or Bitbucket or SourceForge, and then that remote repository is your single source of truth. So when your engineers or developers want to fix a bug or change something, they would take a copy of the repository, work with it on their local machines, and then they can use Git to track the changes, save the changes, and push the changes from their machine to the remote repository. Now Git has many features and benefits, and some of the highlights are that it's free, it's open source, it supports collaboration, it can track your history, it has the ability to do branching, which we'll talk about later, and it's also a lightweight tool that you can use. Now to be able to use Git, you do have to install it on your machine. So you can download it by heading over to the Git website and downloading the installer, or you can use a package manager to install it. Now traditionally Git is a command line tool, but there are graphical user interface available. So Git has its own graphical user interface that again you can install on your machine, or you could use something like Gitkraken or GitHub Desktop, as they're both popular graphical user interfaces and quite a lot of tutorials around there if you aren't familiar with them. Now today we want to talk about some of the Git commands and help you understand what they do and get familiar with the ones that you can use. So one of the first things you need to do once you've installed the Git client, you need to configure your name and address. So you would use the git config command as on screen here to configure your name and your email address. So this is in preparation for when you're making changes to the repository and you want to be able to track who you are and what you've done. And this is just so that your colleagues and your peers, or even yourself, can see what you did and who did what to the repository. So now you have the Git client configured, it's time to get a clone of your remote repository to your local machine so you can work on it. And this is when we use the git clone command. So it's as simple as using git clone and then the URL of the repository you want to take a copy of. So if we look at GitHub, when you are inside your GitHub repository, there's a button called code. And when you click on that, it gives you the options to clone. And if we take the URL that's seen here on our screen, we can take that and then put git clone and then that URL on our machine, and then when we execute that command, the Git repository will be copied to our local machine. So you've been working on the copy of your local repository, maybe adding features to your code or fixing a bug. And that has ultimately resulted in file changes, maybe modifications to a file, deletion of a file, or maybe you've added new files. To track those changes and get them ready to join the remote repository, you need to use the git add command. Now with the git add command, there are a few options. So if you do git add with a dot, that stages new files and modifications, but it doesn't include deletions. So that would add new files and modifications, but if you've deleted a file as part of your changes, this wouldn't push that deletion to the remote repository. If we use the git add -a, that stages all changes. So new files, modifications, deletions, that's the command you want for that. We've also got git add -u, and that stages modifications and deletions, but doesn't include any new files. So if you've created a new file, you can add that new file to the remote repository by using the -u command. So there's lots of different switches for your git add command, so it's one to be aware of and understand the use cases for each of them. Now chances are you'll probably be working with a graphical client when you're renaming files, maybe using the tools inside your operating system to rename the file, or maybe even using something like Visual Studio Code when you're working in your code. But I think it's important to understand how you can rename files using git commands, so let's have a look at it. The git mv command helps you with renaming, but that command itself is doing a few things when you use it. Ultimately, git mv is equivalent to 3 commands under the hood. Let's have a look at that in more detail. So if we have to rename a file, we would use git mv and then rename it. However, under the hood, what it's doing is the first command is mv, and then it's taking the old file name and the new file name. It's then adding that new file to our repository changes, and then removing that old file. So the mv command is a Linux or Unix command that is used to change the file name. The git add command is used to stage the new version of the file. And the last part, like I said, is git rm, which removes the old file from being tracked. So ultimately, when you're using git mv, it simplifies the naming of the file, because I think it would be very complicated if we had to do that and use 3 commands each time to do the file renaming. But of course we could if we wanted to. So here's an example of using git mv to rename a file. So we have git mv, and then the first name of our file is the existing or current file, and then the second part of it is the new name of the file that we want. So we're changing blogimage.png to generic-blogimage.png. So we're renaming it using that command. Just to complicate things, git mv is also the command you can use to move a file from one location to another within your repository. So again, understanding how these commands work and what they do is very important. So here's an example of using git mv to move a file. We've got the command at the start, then we have the current location and name of the file, and then the second half of the command is the new location of the file. Now you can see we're not changing the name, we're just changing the location here for that. Now git mv is a great command on its own, but if we look at the documentation, there are some options or switches we can use with the command to help us do exactly what we really want to do. So if we were to do git mv-f, that option is effectively telling Git we are okay to overwrite the destination of our new file. So it's basically forcing any renaming or move you want to happen. So this one, be cautious with it because you could overwrite something that you need. If we use -k option when we're doing this, this allows Git to skip over any erroneous conditions resulting from the git mv call. So for example, if you're trying to move a file to another location and that file already exists, the command would error out. If you don't want to see the error and have Git move onto the next instruction you have, then the -k option is there for you. The -n option is actually short for dry run, so --dry -run. It won't actually carry out the move or the rename, but it will show you what would happen if you did perform the command. So that's a great one for testing and checking before you actually issue the git mv command. And the last switch or option that we have is the verbose option. So -v would give you more information and feedback when you actually execute the command. So again, great for being able to track what you've done in case you've done anything erroneous. So there comes a point when you're working on your local repository and you want to save your changes. The git commit is like setting a checkpoint. You can come back to this checkpoint at a later point if you need to. When you issue the git commit command, we need to issue a message to explain the changes we have. This will help you or the next person along understand what has changed. Once we have committed our changes, we need to send them to the remote repository. We can do this using the push command. The git push command uploads the commits you have made to that remote repository. Only committed changes will be uploaded. The git pull command is the one you would use to get any updates from the remote repository. This command actually does 2 things in the background. It is a combination of the 2 other commands, git fetch and git merge. So first of all, it gets the updates from the remote repository, and then it applies the changes to your local copy of the repository. So it's ultimately issuing a git fetch and a git merge in the background, but by using git pull, we can simplify our administration and do that action quicker. Now, branches are an everyday part of the process when using Git. Effectively, they are a point to your changes. You might create a new branch when you want to work on a new feature or a bug fix and keep those changes completely separate until you're ready to release them. Best practice would say that any changes you make, even to your own side hustle projects, should be encapsulated in a branch. You really shouldn't commit to the main branch to avoid issues or eek moments. But yes, branches are a great way of being able to store your changes for a specific feature or a bug fix separately from your main code. If you have a copy of a repository and you want to make changes, then creating a new branch, as I said, is best practice. To create a new branch, you need to run the command git checkout-b and then the branch name. And you can start to work on making changes without touching the main or production files that you have. When you create a branch on your local copy of the repository, it won't automatically create within the remote location. When you come to push changes to that remote location, you just can't use git push command like you would do if you were working on the main branch. So you can either use one of two commands. So you can use git push-u origin and then the branch name, or git push-u origin head. Referencing head saves you from having to type out the exact branch name, which is handy if you've forgotten what you actually called the branch. So let's look at some other git commands that I find are quite helpful. Git status displays the state of the working directory and the staging area. It will show you any changes that have been staged, any which haven't, and any files that Git is not tracking. Git status won't show you the commit history of the repository though. On a local repository on my machine, I can run that command and it shows me this information. And what we're seeing here on screen tells me that there are files staged, but they haven't been committed yet. Git log is the command you want to use to see the repository's commit history. So you can look at a lot of information from this command. The spacebar helps you to scroll down and you can exit it using Q. If you want to make it a bit more manageable to read, and if you're looking for a specific period of time, you can use some additional syntax on the command to limit the information, such as git log-n and then 3, and that will show you the information from the last 3 commits on this branch. Git blame is also a useful command if you want to understand who authored a certain change in the history of the repository. You can't use git blame across the repository. You need to specify a specific file you want to query. So you need to type in something like git blame readme.md. Now the thing to remember with this command is it is case sensitive. If your file name is in all caps, you need to use that within the git blame command. Otherwise it won't pull any information back. This is a great quote that I found, and it effectively says that even people who are great at using command line tools will be a bit more productive if they use a GUI in certain situations, just because of the inherent traits we have as human beings. So although I use a lot of these Git commands when I'm working on certain projects, I also like to use graphical user interfaces. And at the moment, my favourite one is Gitkraken. So if you'd like to have a go at Gitkraken, please head on over to the link on screen. You'll be able to download Gitkraken and have a free account created for you to use that. So definitely check it out. As well as understanding the Git command, it's important to learn about the graphical tools available to you as well. Thanks for tuning in, folks. You can find more links about Git and learning resources on screen as well, so do check them out, and I'll hopefully see you again soon. Thanks, folks.